welcome to Delaware Valley University and to the presentation that will be sponsored by the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance as well as our One Health effort. And if you have not heard about One Health, it's an approach that recognizes the health of people and that it is very, very closely related to the health of animals, the health of the environment, the health of everything, as our One Health chair, Reg Hoyt, likes to say, and of course the health of the soil, which we will be hearing about tonight. I'd like to now introduce Paul Weinstein. He's treasurer of the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance, and once again, thank you all for being here.
Welcome, everybody. As Jackie said, I am the treasurer of the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance. So I'd like to give you just a brief history and background and mission statement of the Food Shed Alliance. Some of you are very familiar with us and some you may not be. And this year is actually our 20th anniversary. So 20 years ago, a small group of volunteers, many of whom are here tonight, including Robin Hoy, who's one of our primary founders, gathered to discuss ways to work together to create a market for locally grown food. Back then, 20 years ago, there weren't as many farmers markets as there are today. And out of that, the idea for the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance was born. And BCFA, as we call it, was incorporated in July of 2006 and filed to be a 501c3. Its mission was to build an alternative, local, healthy, sustainable food system that would support farms, communities, and local economies, increase local food resiliency and food security while reducing food-related greenhouse gas emissions and toxins in the environment. And the whole thing began with just local volunteers and local contributors. And during the first year of the organization, primarily focused on starting the Wrightstown Farmers Market, also started doing some education programs and farm tours, because we want to get people to know our farmers. Second year, they grew the Wrightstown Farmers Market, added more programs and farm tours. 2019, fast forward, adopted the Doylestown Farmers Market, created a website and a newsletter, and on our website there's a searchable farm guide, a local farm guide which shows you where all the farms in we call the food shed, which is Bucks County and beyond. And collaborated with, this is the winter market for the Wrightstown market. And educational programs included pasture raised, why is it worth it? The Real Skinny on Healthy Fats, container and vertical gardening, backyard chickens, food, your delicious medicine. And then we did more farm tours, over 60 farm tours in 20 years. And there's the Doylestown Farmers Market. And we collaborated, we started doing a 5K at Del Val for a fundraiser, screenings at the County Theater for different films over the years, and everything's been done by volunteers. We do have a couple paid staff people, administrative assistant, and the two farmers market managers. And then in 2019, we initiated our small farm grant program. And primarily through the generosity of our donors, we were able to do that. And the grants prioritize sustainable and regenerative agriculture, something, farmers within our food shed. We define a 100-mile radius, something that will have an impact on the farm's long-term growth. And the grants range from $500 up to $3,000. And the kind of things the grants have been done for, just some examples, is hoop houses, converting a container to a cooling room, refrigeration for an on-site farm store, could also be for farming education. This is Tom Murtha, one of our panelists tonight's Blooming Glen Farm, and his container that became a cooler. Some hoop houses, canopy for Rolling Hills Farm at the farmer's market, and this is a potato digger, Tinicum CSA. So this is a kind of a graph of the different amount of awards we've done over the years. So we've done over $30,000 since 2019 to 19 farms. And 2026 is looking to be our best year ever. We budgeted $12,000 for small farm grants due to some generous donations we got in the fall and the winter. And we already have 6 applications in that we're considering. A major aspect of our mission is community education, and that's why we're having this evening tonight. Let me just close this. Over the last 20 years, we've come to understand the importance of regenerative agriculture to our community, our environment, and our health. And the more people who know about and support regenerative agriculture, the more it'll grow and expand. And in the handouts we've been giving you, there's a list of 34 farms in our food shed, Bucks County, surrounding counties, that all have regenerative practices. So we'd like you to support these farms. That's how they're going to continue to grow. Join a CSA, shop at the farmer's market, shop at the farm stand. And there are also 3 farms listed that donate 100% of their produce to food banks. And you can support them through volunteering there or donating. So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Ann Bilké. Ann attended the University of California, Santa Cruz, earning a bachelor's degree in biology and natural history, and she also holds a master's degree in landscape architecture from UC Berkeley. Before becoming an author, Ann worked for over 2 decades in field biology, watershed restoration, including salmon spawning areas, environmental planning, and public health. She and her husband, David Montgomery, co-authored their first book, The Hidden Half of Nature, which explores the fascinating world of both the human and the soil microbiome, the trillions of organisms we've evolved with and live with and benefit us. Their second book, What Your Food Ate, which is the subject of our talk tonight, she'll explain the connections between soil health, regenerative agriculture, and human health. She uses her broad background and endless fascination with the natural world to examine connections between people and their environments. She spends her free time out in the garden with her hands on the plants and in the dirt to stay connected with nature. She's truly passionate about the promise of regenerative agriculture and is a real partner with us in this movement. Everybody please a hand for Ann Bilké.
Can you guess my password? All right. Okay, here we are. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for that nice introduction. And I now realize I need to compete with a potato digger. So let's hope that that goes well. I really like events like this, and in particular when I can be on the ground a little bit and when there's pre-event gathering. It really gives me sort of a sense of the vibrancy and the dedication and the commitment of so many people to issues that are really important for, you know, each of us as individuals, for our communities, and for the planet at large. So I'm really honored that you all have taken the time. You know, it's a nice evening out there. You could be doing other things, but you've chosen to come here and, you know, listen to me natter at you about things that I'm guessing there are some people out there that probably know more than I do about everything. So that is always a thrilling prospect, to sort of find your soulmates. Okay, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we are going to have a panel, and I think that sounds really, really interesting too. So yeah, this book actually is built on the shoulders of these 3 other books. And The Hidden Half of Nature and What Your Food Ate, as Paul explained, these are collaborations between me and my husband, David Montgomery. Now, Dave and I kind of joke, and it's like, how did you guys even get into soil? Dave came up with this, and I thought, well, that's pretty apt. And he said, well, I study the dead stuff, rocks. And I said, yeah, and then I'm the biologist, and I am enamored with life and with how things grow and change and survive and thrive or die. And soil is really the intersection of that dead world of rocks and the living world of biology. And so maybe it was meant to be that we would be writing these books together. We don't really know. But in any event, it all started just about 20 years ago when Dave wrote this book, Dirt. And that is a history of farming and agriculture and the toll that it's taken on soil. And he was the one who said, you should write a book about the garden that you built. That's The Hidden Half of Nature, and that took us on a journey through history, through microbiomes, and we came to see actually how closely knit together the human and the soil microbiome are. And then Dave went around the world looking at visiting farmers who were farming regeneratively in completely different places. And what's interesting and what I really like about regenerative farming and ag is that it's not cookie cutter. It is the furthest thing from cookie cutter, because you're dealing with the hyper-local conditions of a given farm, and you're figuring out how you're going to improve and maintain soil health. And it was almost inevitable, I think, that we would be then writing What Your Food Ate, because these 3 previous books, there was the problem of agriculture and soil, and The Hidden Half was like, is there a cure? Oh, there is, and I loved it because the cure involved biology. I love that. And then always, you know, sort of the hands-on stuff was growing a revolution, and so here we are then. We never could have started with What Your Food Ate, but that's where we are. And in one way or another, I think all of these books touch on what I always talk about agriculture and medicine as 2 of humanity's greatest endeavors, right? None of us would be here without agriculture and medicine, and yet they remain oddly and distantly separate from one another in many ways. And you know, organizations like yours, I think, are helping to bridge these 2 worlds, because they really are quite interconnected. And so in thinking about all this, and in starting with agriculture, one of the things about this, one of our great endeavors that started, they keep saying 10,000 years ago, but I've been hearing 10,000 years for at least 2 decades, so we'll just go 10,000 years and a little more, right? That's how long agriculture has been happening, at least in the way that we think of it. And one of the go-to oldest practices is preparing that soil for planting. So that's tillage. So that's running various things through the soil. Probably originally it was stuff like sticks, and then later, you know, we're all up to, you know, these giant John Deere tractors. So tillage is what I think a lot of people, farmers, non-farmers, think about when they think of farming. It truly is the oldest practice. But tillage, when you put that together with time, it really takes a toll on the soil. And this bit of research here, and this is just in North America, right? So we're not some ancient civilization like in Greece or Southern Europe or China or something like that. We're relatively, this continent has not had nearly as much agricultural pressure, at least in terms of the soil, as some of these much older civilizations. And yet, we've lost about 50% of the soil organic matter from areas in our country that were previously prairies and forests, and we converted them to farmland. That's a lot of organic matter to lose. And what it has meant is this, unfortunately, is the state of the soil on a lot of farms. And when you've robbed organic matter out of the soil, or you physically lost the soil, it's eroded away, carried away by wind or water, that makes it really hard to farm. And so where are we at then with this, this long-term loss of the organic matter? It led us straight to the synthetic inputs, chiefly fertilizers and various kinds of pesticides. Because you try to grow things in degraded soil, and you can't. The soil is too depleted, so we turn to these other things. And somehow I think really that's modern farming? I mean, I'm not saying modern life is great and is the be-all, end-all, but in general, the longer you do something, the better you should become at it, right? There's that whole, whatever that number of hours of when you practice something, you become an expert. I almost feel like we've become worse and worse the longer we've been at farming, at least if you take a look, if you're looking at things from the perspective of soil. So, I mean, but at the same time, are people bad? Okay, only some of us. No one in this room, okay. But we faced a challenge. We faced a challenge ever since we decided it was a good idea to grow food. And for much of agriculture, famine was ever present, right? This is why we are still so concerned about food production. However, I will say, for the most part, in most places of the world, famine is no longer the problem it once was, but we still seem to be sort of stuck in that mindset and not asking ourselves, wait a minute, we need to keep farming well into the future, and if we're continually degrading soils, what are we going to do? And another piece of this puzzle has to do with the rate at which sort of modern agriculture causes the loss of soil, which is up here, erodes an inch about every 20 years, which doesn't sound like much, right? If you're a human who lives, maybe into your 80s, it's like, 4 inches? That's not that much. But consider this. If nature's pace is, this is on average, it's not this rate everywhere on the planet, but the math isn't working for us. If it takes nature 1,000 years to replace that, so this is a problem, and as though we need more evidence to ask ourselves, well, how is modern farming then working out for us? All of these red areas have had, they're so compromised in terms of the soil that they're considered barely productive. This is about 1/3 of all arable land on the planet. So again, it's another thing that says we need to be changing our practices. And the dark orange, that dark orange is starting to turn, it's headed in the direction of those red areas. And so that's just the story of soil and the toll that agriculture has taken on it over the years. And I'm sure some of you are aware of this. This is from a guy named David Thomas who did some research on produce in Britain. And he documented these declines. These are average declines over several different kinds of vegetables, but that's pretty significant. A loss of copper, down 76%, and all of the rest of the figures there. And these minerals and micronutrients, they do very important things in our bodies. That's sort of that is the story of human evolution and the human diet. None of us would be here had our long ago ancestors not figured out what to eat and how to prepare it, because these things are really important for our health. We also know that if animals, livestock, the animal foods in the human diet, if they're eating foods that are deficient, that ripples through to them and then into us. So this is this kind of conundrum, and it brings us to this question, which I've been leading up to. How are we going to pivot? And doesn't it feel dire? I'm turning the talk around now. It's going to get better and better, okay? Phew. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to work with the gut of the earth, with soil, with its diet, and with what it can do when it's fed a diet that helps it thrive. That's the basic story. And much of that story involves microbiomes. And microbiomes are it's one of my favorite topics, and there's a lot you could say about microbiomes. I've got sort of three key points for you to keep in mind. And this first one, these microbes are indigenous to the soil, to our bodies, to our animals, to wild animals. Everything that's got a microbiome co-evolved with those communities of microbes. And this is a really different way of looking at the microbial world, because for a long time we thought microbes were only pathogens and causing diseases. So they're utterly necessary for their hosts. And in every case where we've got a microbiome, they are making nutrients in the diet of their host available to that host. I'll get into that more toward the end of the talk. But it's not just the nutrients in the host diet. Some microbes, it's bacteria mostly, they're able to make nutrients. And when I say nutrients, that's sort of writ large. It's not just about carbohydrates and fats and proteins and things like that. Microbiota can make specific metabolites that benefit their host, but they also rely on the host diet for their own health. So you see how quickly things can become entangled. And not surprisingly, microbiomes have a profound influence on host cells and genes. All right, moving into the plant world then, the crop microbiome. I mean, even though, we're growing these plants and they're domesticated, they have a microbiome, and most of it is located in a wild and alive place beneath our feet called the rhizosphere. And what some people think the rhizosphere is the most life-dense, I would say in a healthy soil, the most life-dense and diverse place on our planet. To me, that's wild. The rhizosphere is just this, it's a very narrow zone around the root system of a plant. So it's not like a foot away or even 6 inches away from the root system. It's right there at the root system of every plant. And so that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? Like, why would soils cover, a lot of our planet. Why are all these microbes just hanging around these plant roots? And it has to do with exudates. Plants have a lock on photosynthesis. I can't photosynthesize, nobody out there can. Plants are the only organisms that can do that. And with all of that energy that they get from photosynthesis, which happens to be a not insignificant amount of that their energy, they take about 30% and they use it to produce exudates that they then feed their microbes with. And here's what that looks like. So exudates are flowing nonstop out of the roots of plants. And when I say exudates, it's not like there's just like a half a dozen or something. There are thousands of different types of exudates, and these plants are determining the composition, what to make that exudate cocktail with, based on communication with their microbiome, probably with other plants as well. So these exudates are flowing out These microbes are feeding on them. So take, for example, the fetching fungi. These are mycorrhizal fungi, and there they are plastered one end, either on the outside of a root. Some types of mycorrhizal fungi are inside of the plant root, and there they are attached. The other end of them is off, way beyond the root system in the soil, gathering things for their host. Phosphorus is one of those things. That's the P of NPK, essential for plant growth, but also stuff like zinc. And the microbiome thing goes even deeper. Way out in the soil there, where these fungal tips are gathering things, there are populations of bacteria that are helping free up the minerals in the soil to put them into the fungal body to transport back to the host's body. And when those goodies come back, the exudates flow, and the fungi are getting energy, they're getting nutrition to keep on doing all of that fetching. And with bacteria, they can't really move around. They're stuck there in their rhizosphere. They're consuming exudates, and directly and indirectly, they will turn these exudates into things like plant growth promoting hormones. And so the botanical world has, in fact, farmed out much of what it needs to the microbial world. I mean, if I've got microbes hanging around my roots that can produce plant growth hormones I need to grow as a plant, why would I'm not going to waste my energy doing that. I can just feed them exudates and get the hormones. And there's all kinds of other things that the microbiota around roots provide. There's also signaling compounds. There's information about moisture levels. So I always call this, I often have a picture, and I put a big brain down there in the rhizosphere, because it is really the brain of the botanical world, and its intelligence in every sense of that word that beats anything really that we could do. And just to give you sort of a little bit of a sense of that world down there in the soil, these are the fungal hyphae. So these long thread-like structures that are part of the fungal body, traveling through the soil, picking up all these minerals, putting them in their hyphae, getting them back to their plant host so that the fungi can get more exudates. So we want to keep this crop microbiome alive. I mean, the amount of stuff that the microbiome is doing for its host is sort of immeasurable. And it's really, it takes the place of fertilizers. It takes the place of pesticides. It takes the place of everything that conventional farming has been dumping into the soil. And I don't know why we would not at least avail ourselves of using some of that, or figure out ways that we can dovetail what the crop microbiome does with agricultural products. I mean, wouldn't that be great? So you're leveraging, sort of the best of the modern world, these products, but they cannot be harming and killing off the crop microbiome. We've got to figure out how to dovetail those things so that it's working. And these 4 practices, this is how you keep a crop microbiome alive, right? Here they are, these trillions of tiny little organisms. We cannot be constantly disturbing the soil. And that's sort of the main problem with tillage. Imagine if somebody ripped the roof off right now and got a bunch of giant egg beaters and started in here. We'd be flying against the walls. It would be highly unpleasant. I wouldn't finish my talk. Many of us would be maimed, some killed. We cannot, the disturbance levels just need to be kept as low as possible, and that is a big tension in farming, right? So you've got to get seeds in the ground. You've got to get crops harvested. So how are we balancing that? And right now we're not balancing it very well, and the crop microbiome can take hits. You always want that soil covered, right? This is the home of the crop microbiome. And diversity. These exudates that plants are making, they're different depending on plant species. And we want to keep the diversity in the microbiome high down there in the soil. And so with the diversity of plants, you get different exudate mixes. And this makes for a resilient crop microbiome as well. I just think about all that's happening geopolitically today, and we've heard all about the fertilizer prices, and I'm thinking, you know, soil health sounds to me like it's a de-risk insurance policy. I mean, really, the more we can wean ourselves off of these synthetic inputs that we have little control over, maybe the better off that we are. And so all of these practices that help keep the crop microbiome alive reduce risk for farmers. And integrating animals, not everybody loves animals or wants animals, but they come in different forms. I mean, maybe microbes or animals. But this is really sort of talking about if you've got ruminants or chickens or pigs, somehow get them in to the system because they have a lot of nutrients to also provide for the soil. And interestingly, these same principles are often what you'll see when you are reading about regenerative agriculture. And I don't know if whoever came up with that term however long ago, or its different permutations, thought about it in terms of keeping crop microbiomes alive, but that to me, for me, makes sense for why we need these practices, because we're keeping the things alive in the soil that allow crops to thrive and survive. And really what we have here is these symbioses between the fungi and the bacteria and their host in plants. These go back to these started long ago in the earliest, when the earliest land plants came out of these watery aquatic environments. And they were these puny little things. We probably might not even have recognized them as plants, but they had roots. And the roots went into the soil and began forming these associations because plants are stuck in place. If they don't have a robust microbiome working for them, they will not survive. So I don't know anything in the human world that has, you know, a track record of over 400 million years that's still working. Why would we not use this? Why would we not take care of and conserve something that works this well? And that leads me to, okay, so if these microbes are eating a diet of exudates, what can they do if that's, you know, diversity of exudates in abundance as much as these microbes can eat? So this is a little bit of research where somebody was looking at different crops, what was in the exudates of that crop, the symbiont, so that's what microbe is in that microbiome and what these outcomes were. So let's just take a look at pepper plants. And in this particular example, malic acid is a common root exudate. In this example, they saw that the populations of bacillus were up. And as a consequence, we're seeing a decrease in aphids. I, in fact, was out squishing aphids on some of my plants before I was headed out the door, and I thought, oh, the microbiome, where are you? Now you're making me work and squish these aphids. Ralstonia solanacearum, that's a nasty pathogen. You look at your plant one day, you're in love with it, oh, you're so great, and the next day you come out and it's a wilted mess on the ground, okay? So you don't want that. Malic acid feeds that symbiont, and then you get these kind of outcomes. And likewise, for these melons, this particular exudate that melons are releasing is feeding the Enterobacter and Bacillus, and I like these outcomes too. I know fungal pathogens are amongst the worst in both soil and people, and so anything to keep fungal diseases down in the soil is a really good thing. So there's all kinds of research out there that documents, you know, these correlations and these connections between exudate composition, symbionts, and the benefits that hosts get from them. So, you know, if I were to wrap this all up and say, you know, I just want you to remember one thing, it would be this. What we really have is a health plan for soil and crops. when we take care of the crop microbiome. And there's nothing, fertilizers are not a health plan, pesticides are not a health plan. Those are dealing with deficiencies. This health plan is one that is building sufficiency into crops. And I have a question about all of this then. What would agriculture be like if we nourished and fed crop microbiomes and those in our livestock because of the practices that we're doing? And that was really what led to What Your Food Ate. And one of the key takeaways for What Your Food Ate, for those of you who have read the book or dipped into it, we bring up this thing we call the Fab Four. So all these things listed up here are profoundly influenced by farming practices, the levels of these things that make it into plant and animal foods. And micronutrients are probably maybe the most familiar to folks out there. These are the things like, say, copper, zinc, or iron that we need in very small quantities, but they do very big, important things in our bodies. Vitamins are also a kind of a micronutrient. Fat balance, we're talking about, I'll get into this in a bit, but it's between two different fats. What is that doing in the animal's body? Because it's heavily influenced by their diet. And then, of course, phytochemicals. Exudates are an example of phytochemicals. Beta-carotene in squash, the resveratrol in grapes. All of these are compounds that plants are producing, not actually for our benefit, but because they have a stuck-in-place lifestyle, phytochemicals are what let them keep pests away, communicate with other plants, communicate with the microbiome. Plants are real chemical messengers. I mean, what is that? There was that company, I can't remember, Better Living Through Chemistry. Anyway, plants have nailed better living through chemistry long before we were ever on the scene. And then lastly, the last Fab Four here is microbial metabolites. And this is a whole new area, really, when it comes to human health that is a part of the research around, especially the human microbiome. So these are the compounds that the microbes are producing that live on us and in us. And there's a number of them, as I'll get into, that are quite beneficial. And a point about the Fab Four. They are only found in plant and animal foods in the human diet. So in other words, human biology, my body, my genome and yours cannot gin up beta-carotene. That is only coming into my diet through plants. We can modify some plants, or some fats, but we cannot make, for example, omega-3 fats or omega-6 fats. So actually, pregnant women are kind of an exception to that. Or we can make some, but for most people, it's not enough to really be significant. And microbial metabolites, none of us are microbes. We're not making microbial metabolites. And yet the Fab Four are really, really important, as it turns out, for human health. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And one of the things, if you just sort of come up to the 40,000-foot view and you think about it, most of us think about nutrients and nutrition as, oh yeah, okay, we've got the egg and the sperm that first came together, so here's the beginning of a human, and then those cells eventually grow into something like 47 trillion cells. And so there's a part of the human life, say the first 20 years or so, it's all about biomass, growing the biomass that is the human body. But the rest of our lives, the bulk of our lives, really is taking care of that biomass. That's the job of human biology, and that is really the role of the human diet, or it should be. We've got to take care of all that biomass, and I always say here that I'm tired of super everything, superfoods, super this, super that. We just need normal function, and that's where the Fab Four come in. They help human biology just function normally. We don't need to be like supercharging things. And yet when I say normal, what's normal for me, we're all unique, right? What's normal for me is not normal maybe for others. What's normal for an infant is not normal for an 80-year-old. But the cool thing about human biology and the way we've co-evolved with our diet is that can work itself out. So this is what I mean when we just want normal function, folks. There's like, yeah, I'll leave it on that. Otherwise, I'll keep going. Okay, so for What Your Food Ate, we did a field trip out to some farms to do a little bit of research and collect some data on soil health and crop health. And this is a regenerative vegetable farm in Connecticut that was an absolutely magical place on the day that we visited. There was the farmers were kind of complaining. They're like, oh my God, it's mid-June and we haven't had a day of sunshine. And I'm looking around going, oh, things look pretty good to me. Everything's really well watered. It was that kind of a light that just makes, you see all of the dimensions of a green color. It was really remarkable. And I like this photo too because I'm seeing regenerative practices. I'm seeing the soil covered. I'm seeing diverse crops. Brian and Anita, minimal disturbance with their soil. And then Brian says the animals are underground in the rhizosphere. So I said, okay, there they are. You're integrating them. And then clear on the opposite side of the country is Singing Frogs Farm, which this is in wine country. It was completely opposite of the Connecticut farm. It was too hot for me, meaning it was probably in the high 80s, early 90s. I cannot even believe we're out there dying in the heat. But then I started to look at the crops and I'm like, God, these plants are tough. They're tough. And in part, Paul and Elizabeth Kaiser, they're the farmers out here, they have worked religiously on the organic matter content of their soils. They are heavy, heavy mulchers. And water is a scarce resource in California, very scarce. And so they don't want to run into that being a limitation. So they really, really look to get their soils pumped up in water and then keep it in there. And so this is soil sample side by side. That dark soil is from Singing Frogs, and the farm next door is a vineyard, so it's a monoculture. And I have to say, Sonoma County looks like Iowa. The only difference is Iowa grows corn, Sonoma County grows grapes. And it's row after row and monoculture after monoculture, whether it's a red grape or a white grape. In any event, you can just see the difference in these soils. We did actually, if you know what a slake test is, that sort of tests the how well soil holds together when water hits it. And the slake test that we did between these two, that the clod from the vineyard, it started to fall apart. So you put two clods in two separate containers of water, and you see how fast does the soil fall apart. And it's not being stirred or anything like that. The water's in, you drop the clods in. By the time the clod from the vineyard reached the bottom of the glass jar, it was over half gone. It just was all dusty. Singing Frogs Farm, it never did fall apart. So we ended up publishing this research because we're trying to look at what is the connection between nutrient density and soil health. And this is one very small study, but we had 10 paired farms across the country in these locations. And so we were getting soil samples and we were getting crop samples off of the regenerative farm and off of the conventional farm, and both these farms were growing the same crop that we tested. And so here on this slide, that blue box is just the difference in organic matter in the soil between the regen and the conventional farms. And you can see the regen farms have, at the top end there, about twice as much organic matter in the soil, which was a good thing. We wanted to see that, right? These people are telling, and these were self-identified regenerative farmers, have been doing regen, I think we said, for at least 10 years. So that's looking at, I'll hit the soil health score here in the next slide. So here's the crops along the left side, cabbage, corn, and so on. And the soil health scores, so this is done through a soil test called the Haney test, and it gets at biological activity more than your sort of standard type of soil test. And so for the soil health scores on the regen farms, you can see there anywhere from, and this is all, these are all average scores. It was not this way on every single regen farm, okay? But on average, 30% to 2.5 times higher soil health score. So that was information that was useful. I really like the above two. Micronutrients, 15 to 30% higher, and same with phytochemicals. And you'll see the significance of this. So this is where we have a link between soil functioning, soil health, and nutrient density. Now, some have said, oh, yeah, that study can't possibly have meant anything, though. It was so small. And, you know, and what about this, and what about that? And to which Dave and I say, okay, but it doesn't mean it's nothing. Maybe we should do more research. Maybe instead of research on the effects of nitrogen fertilizer on corn, which the result of which is it makes the corn grow, maybe we could do research on these kinds of things to see which kinds of practices are best for the crop microbiome and which translate into nutrient density for plant foods in the human diet. I think that's a good idea. I'd like to find out what more can we learn, because this can inform our practices, right? Okay, I'm going to do a short thing on animals here, because I'm guessing there's some animal fans out there. And I would have to say, doing the research for What Your Food Ate made me realize how completely underappreciated and underestimated animals are for not only their cognitive abilities to know how to choose a diet that is healthy for them and that is self-medicating. And I guess I've never seen if plants could talk, they can't. I think they would be telling us a lot of things. With animals, just because they're closer to us in terms of their body shape, size, and so on, I think they are telling us stories. And the conventional production methods really just sort of are in conflict almost every step of the way with the biology that is inherent to farm animals, and especially to our ruminants. So for those who may not know, the rumen it's the heart of the microbiome for a ruminant animal, which is cows, goats, and sheep. These are actually very specialized herbivores. You know, it's different than deer, different than moose. The rumen is where most of this animal's microbiome dwells. And I began to realize in doing this research, it seems that when the rumen is functioning, not super, not abnormal, but normal, the animal is healthy, and good health leads to happiness, which is what we want our animals to have for as long as they are living, in my opinion. So we have the rumen here, and all of the microbes in here possess genes that can produce enzymes that make all of the energy in the plant foods that these herbivores eat available to them. And there are also microbial metabolites made in the rumen that transfer through to the animal. And so this is kind of the takeaway, really. The rumen is the rhizosphere in our ruminant animals. And the microbiome of ruminants thrives on fresh, living plants. So this is in a nutshell, this is the whole problem with all of these eating dead plants and eating a bunch of seeds if an animal is a ruminant. And so three key things about, what does the rumen thrive on? As I said, fresh living plants, and that has to do with, in living plants, the balance of these two particular fats, omega-3s and omega-6s, is optimal for a ruminant. That's why we want them out on pasture. This is the primary thing. And when I say omega-3s, a lot of people think, well, isn't that in fish? Yes, but guess where else you'll find an awful lot of omega-3s? And that is in the leafy photosynthesizing part of a plant. It's loaded with omega-3s because omega-3s are a part of the biochemistry of photosynthesis. So no omega-3s, the plant would quickly die. And these omega-3s flow right through into the animals that are eating them. And then phytochemicals and fiber are another hugely important part of the diet, and the diet for the animal and the well-being of its rumen. These are sheep, and this person has them grazing off a cover crop in a vineyard. Isn't that smart? I think so. It is keeping weeds out of the vineyard. It's feeding. There's a lot to eat in there for these sheep. So they're saving on feed costs. And so really, when you're thinking about ruminants in particular, hogs and chickens are different, you really want this balance of fats, and you want the phytochemicals and the fiber. And voila, we have a health plan for ruminants. Really, this is what it's about. A little more on the rumen is that it's really metabolic terrain for the animal. And if you take my word for it, study after study on feeding ruminants things that make the rumen unhappy lead to a long list of health problems in the animal, from a shortened life to a miserable life to continual visits from vets. So this is why this kind of a diet is a health plan and part of the metabolic terrain. And I have this quote up here. It's from Louis Pasteur. And so he was started out as a chemist, went into microbiology, and then with the German Robert Koch, they were the ones who put together germ theory. This is how they figured out, you have one microbe, one disease. There's a virus that causes polio. There's a different virus that causes rabies, bacteria, tuberculosis, and so on. So these guys were big into the pathogen view of microbes. And Pasteur is said to have stated on his deathbed that the pathogen is nothing, the terrain is everything. And what he meant by that was the state of the body, the state of the person who either has this disease or is fending off this disease is as important as whether or not they ever encounter the pathogen. So, in other words, he came to see that infectious diseases, anyway, were not merely about the presence of a pathogen. It had to do with whether or not that person's biology could push back on that pathogen. And so all of this, the metabolic terrain of our crops and our animals, it ripples into us through the food that we eat. And I'm going to close out this last part of my talk now and talking about us people. So this is information on what we used to die from in the past, not the far distant past, but sort of mid-century, 20th century, and a little before. Those are all infectious diseases. Those are all the pathogens that have taken us out. Measles is coming back, but many other infectious diseases. HIV is another exception to this. They have all been brought under control through clean drinking water played a huge role, vaccines have played a role, and antibiotics have played a role in all of this. So everyone was glad this is actually good news. We're not suffering from diseases like we used to. But around the same time period, 1950s going forward, all of these chronic conditions began to pop up. And what was interesting to folks is it's there's not a pathogen behind these. What is going on? These are perturbations and disturbances of generally some kind of a major system like your digestive tract or maybe your nervous system. And they could not really figure out metabolism. The entirety of metabolism was disordered. And it's now to the point that 7 of 10 people in the U.S. could throw other Western countries in there too, and it wouldn't be far off this mark. We're dying earlier than we should because of these chronic diseases. Not because of infectious diseases, but all of these chronic diseases that, you know, a large body of evidence suggests that diet plays a role in this. Probably things that shouldn't be in the human diet, chemicals that are on there through agricultural practices may also be playing a role here. So this is a big concern in figuring out how to turn this around, and it's why I think soil health is linked to human health and has potential to help turn this around. And so I'm going to run you through just a couple of examples here with the phytochemicals and microbial metabolites. So our microbiome, we're very different than ruminants. Most of what is the important, significant stuff that's happening in ruminants is right up at the top of the digestive tract. Ours is at the lower end, in the colon. And the reason for that is that this is the heart of our microbiome. It is down at the lower end of the digestive tract. And you may see pictures of the human microbiome, and you'll see all the stuff happening in the stomach, and I get so irritated because the stomach is the least hospitable to the human microbiome. It's filled with all these acids. And the reason for that is you get some E. coli on food, you want it to hit an acid vat first, and then you want it to keep going down your digestive tract. So the stomach is really quite inhospitable, and you'll see that the number of bacteria per milliliter there on the left. It starts out hardly any up in the stomach, and by the time you get down to the colon, that's the heart of our microbiome. And interestingly, the human genome does not possess the genes to make enzymes to break down a good number of plant foods in the human diet, whole plant foods. But guess where all that, I guess I would call it deconstruction for suitable uptake, something like that. All of that is happening down in the colon because our microbes are getting a hold of, we're feeding them with these whole plant foods, and they are able to survive on that and thrive on that. And so, if a doctor had ever told Dave and I, oh, we always hear eat fiber, and it's like, oh gosh, fiber looks so unappealing. It's like a bowl of, shredded wheat or something. It doesn't look great. If they would have said, but you're feeding your microbiome, and here's what your microbiome does, I would have signed up immediately. Thankfully, I now know that, so I think about feeding my microbiome daily. And of course, this would be our equivalent of the rhizosphere. All right, so what happens then with dietary phytochemicals? Well, newsflash here, yes, they're primarily in fruits and vegetables, but they're also in animal foods, depending on what those animals ate. So this is why if you get, butter that's a really nice dark golden yellow color, that's beta carotene. The animal is taken in through its diet of fresh plants, and that beta carotene is getting incorporated into the butter. So whatever source, plant or animal, it comes in to the human body, goes through the stomach, lands down in our colon, where our microbiome gets a hold of it, and our microbiota break these foods down, and in the process, they are creating other kinds of metabolites from the whole plant foods in our diet. And I really like all these effects on the left-hand side of the screen there for what these microbial metabolites are doing for us. I love it all. Having had cancer, yeah, I don't want it again. And anti-diabetic, like normal blood sugar, that's good. Inflammation is sort of the root of all evil with a number of chronic diseases that can start them. Cognition, we all want to be thinking and having our hearts work for as long as we live. And so this is sort of the world of microbial metabolites, and it is vast. There are a vast number of chemicals and compounds. The general chemical categories are there on the right. But really the upshot here is that some 40% of the compounds circulating in any person's body at any one time were not made by a human cell. They were made by a microbial cell. 40%. You can't, there's no way this isn't important, all right? It's just incontrovertible to me. So this is why we want to think about supplying an adequate and diverse diet of plant foods to our microbiome. And you knew this was coming, right? This is really a part of a person's health plan. All right, I have thrown a lot at you tonight. I'm gonna close things out now with a couple of thoughts. And I think really what it comes down to is this: if it's good for the land, it's good for us. Okay, thank you, and ready for the panel, I guess.
All right, I'd like to invite our panelists to come on up. I don't know. All right, thank you very much. I guess the red seat is for me. So I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening. I know some of them. I'm going to start with Tom Murtha, who grows some of my food. So I love seeing you at the Wrightstown Farmers Market. And Tom is with Blooming Glen Farm. He's been there for many years, and they have CSA memberships and also sell at the Wrightstown Farmers Market in Bucks County and at Head House Market in Philadelphia. At the other end is Sean Ryan from Tussock Sedge Farm. Sean and his wife Tanya Rosenberger Ryan operate Tussock Sedge Farm in Percy. And so at Tussock Sedge Farm, they raise grass-fed beef, and that's part of what Tanya's family established in 2000. So they have cows, pigs, and chickens on pasture and use rotational grazing. Of course, we know Ann, Debbie Bernstein. So right there, Dr. Bernstein, or Debbie Bernstein, MD, is part of the Holistic Healing Center, and she blends traditional training in physical medicine and rehabilitation with advanced credentials in integrative and functional medicine. So a physician dealing with many of these conditions that Ann mentioned. Krista Hirschman, okay, Dr. Krista Hirschman, PhD, from the Rodale Institute. She has worked in healthcare for 25 years, and she is currently on the education team with the Rodale Institute, which, of course, if you're not familiar with Rodale, they are some of the founders of organic agriculture from a long time ago. And then Julie Lockman. Julie is has a doctoral degree in naturopathic medicine, and she is a frequent lecturer on these topics of health and the human microbiome and how to optimize your health. So this is our panel this evening. I'd like to introduce you in the audience to raise your hand if you have a question for the panel. I'm going to actually let each person start out by saying a few things about their role in the food system and their role in the work that Ann so eloquently spoke about this evening. So we'll let each panelist, and you have a,
Hello, hello.
There you go. And then we will start with the questions. So
my name is Tom Murtha, and along with my wife Tricia Borneman, we're Blooming Glen Farm. And I would say that our role in all of this work that we were talking about tonight is obviously as farmers. And when we were thinking about this and reading Ann's book, the thing that we've always said from the beginning of the farm was that the soil is kind of like the whole genesis of what organic agriculture is, and that the healthier the soil is, the better, the healthier the people will be as a result of the food that we grow. And just as growers, like, the healthier the soil is, the plants are just better able to withstand pest and disease pressure, which, and Ann's talk kind of touched upon some of that. It kind of makes the farming part a little bit easier. The better care you take of your land is kind of like taking better care of yourself. Happiness and all that good juju comes from that. So I'd say that that's really been a big part of like our role in all this work.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I am from Rodale Institute, which is a regenerative organic research and education farm. And I would say my role, like you said, I've been working in healthcare for 25 years, and I've been working at Rodale for about the past 3. And I'm just getting past the anger phase that I worked in healthcare all those years, and that none of this was ever talked about, except maybe in integrative medicine, except maybe in functional medicine, maybe lifestyle, but in all the different clinical departments I worked in, their grand rounds, their M&Ms, their education programs, this was not discussed. And so I now am sort of a self-appointed ambassador between these two worlds, because I'm making it my mission to make sure that the average physician, particularly in primary care and many of the specialties, has some exposure and understanding for all of this. Things are starting to slowly change in the medical school programs, but for those that are out there in practice, there's a big deficit that needs to be filled.
Thank you. So glad to be here. So in my school, this was just part and parcel of what we learned. Yeah, I know functional doctors have to go back to school to try to learn this, but we learned this. And when I don't do a lot of stool testing, because I see a lot of stool tests come into my office and people want them reviewed, and I call the doctors from the company and they say, well, this means they need to eat more fiber, and this means they need to eat more red food, and this means they need to eat more blue food. So I just tell them those things. Not that we can't test, but let's just start with the basics and get all our different colors and get our 35 to 100 grams of fiber. I also want to share that I have a background in environmental science. I used to work for that company that you mentioned. Like talking about soil and water and all these environmental, relationships is really part of something that makes my work interesting and that enables me to understand all of what you guys do as well. Also wanted to share about Pasteur's quote that he said on his deathbed. That's something that we learned, and unfortunately so many people say, oh, my kid got the normal 5 weeks out of school that they're missing when they go to kindergarten. It's not normal, it's just common. And so that's all about the terrain, and most bacteria, viruses, et cetera, are opportunistic. And if they don't have the opportunity, they're not coming in. So let's keep those critters out.
I wanted to just thank Jackie again and the Del Valle University for hosting this. And I'm very excited to be on this panel with all these people here. As Jackie mentioned, I'm a medical doctor, and physical med and integrative med are my boards. And then I've studied both functional medicine, and I have a master's in nutrition. So I come to this, and we have a team at our practice. I come to this really with a focus on lifestyle. And so doing that, Kirsten, our integrative nutritionist, and I really focus on having whole food and bringing that back into people's lives from the ultra-processed into eating real food. And when we can do what Ann talks about and eat food that has been grown regeneratively, organically, that just makes it all the better. People start having, I'm sure you see it too, the improvement in skin, improvement in energy, improvement in mood, GI tract issues. So it really makes such a huge difference. And so people are often very surprised, but that's what happens. So it's very exciting. And I am personally very passionate about this because, as Ann Bilké mentioned, this is not only good for us, which is very important, and our health, but it really is important to our environment and our local community. And when we can support farmers that are doing such great work, that's very important too. So I really feel like it's just such a win-win. So please support the local farms. We have so many wonderful regenerative farms in this area. We have the CSAs, we have farm stars at some of these farms, and then we have the farmers markets. So please visit.
You already know me.
I'm Sean. My wife Tonya is down in the audience there. I know many of the faces here. So I'm very grateful to be here, very thankful of the work that the Food Shed Alliance does, both in supporting area farms as well as educating the end consumer. Because at the end of the day, really, we can grow and raise the best, most nutrient-dense food, but if consumers don't understand why they should spend the extra dollars for those, then it really doesn't matter. So our focus at Tussock's Edge Farm is really quite simple. We want to raise the most nutrient-dense pasture-raised foods as possible. But it has to be good for every single part of the process, right? It can't just be, oh, well, nutrient density, that's the ultimate goal, because it's not. Everything that we do has to have a benefit. So our method of farming, which involves things that you spoke about, no tillage, no chemicals, ground is constantly covered. We have ruminants out there being rotationally grazed. We are actively building topsoil and improving the ground. So we look at it from many different angles, but we want our practices to be good for the microbes in the soil. We want it to be good for the animals. We want it to be good for the end consumer, and really to tie it all together, we want everything we do to be a positive for the ecosystem around us, for our surrounding community, with an ultimate goal of kind of continually finding new ways and methods each year to be more climate resilient, because as we all know, weather is challenging, weather is unpredictable, and the extremes are certainly more extreme. You used to be able to plan and kind of know what the patterns might be, and really that's all gone out the window. So each year is kind of a new challenge, and everything is different. So Tom and myself and other farmers in the room can actively testify to things just being challenging. But yeah, so that's kind of our goal.
All right, thank you all so much.
I have a question.
Great.
I'm curious, what's the trend are we seeing? What's the percentage of regenerative versus traditional farms? And with the current war going on and they're currently fertilizers, do you guys even use fertilizers?
You want to take a shot at that one first, or?
Yeah, so obviously you hear about fertilizer in the news, especially now with everything going on in the Middle East and the influence that that has on pricing. In traditional agriculture, the goal is really the same. It's to extract as much value from the land as possible. And the way they do that is simple. They just throw as many inputs at it as they can. Right? And on one hand, yeah, they typically get the desired end result. The yield is high. but at what cost, and what really is that yield? So for us, we have gotten completely away from traditional, conventional fertilizers. One, because of the cost, they're incredibly expensive. We farm altogether, including owned land and leased land and borrowed land, nearly 1,000 acres. So if we were utilizing synthetic fertilizer for everything, we simply could not afford it. But for us, to not use those and to depend more on natural products such as the manure from animals out there on pasture. Yes, it reduces costs, but the yield is lower for sure. But that's a good thing. You know, slower farming in a more natural way kind of ties directly into soil health, food health, human health. So that's really,
Did you want to?
yeah.
Tom?
I was just going to try and touch on that first part of your question about, you know, the rising, hopefully rising tide of a different way of approaching agriculture. And I think it was really interesting to see that some of the presentation that Ann had like fact-based science, you know, studies are being done, because I think one of the things to glean is that farmers are tough nuts to crack on a good day. And a lot of people are generational farmers who have, you know, their grandfather farmed a certain way, their dad farmed a certain way. There's an expectation, and there's a lot of pressure. It's like you accept the farm in that generational scheme. That's a lot to live up to. And changing what has been happening on your farm can seem like a really daunting thing, which I've always thought was a bonus for Trish and I, because, you know, she was a journalism major and I was an English major, so obviously we were going to end up being organic vegetable farmers. Like, it was just obvious. But that has also let us be very open to looking at things in a different way, and we always are, you know, as Sean was saying, constantly learning, constantly curious. But I think that the studies that are being done, like that fact-based science to back up, you know, looking and starting to introduce some new practices, and even farmers trying to incorporate those practices on a small way on their farms. You know, we didn't get to where we are, the problems that we have societally in a day, and it's not going to be solved in a day. But, I mean, I think this is really the only sector of agriculture or practicing agriculture that has some promise for the future on all the levels of, you know, climate, you know, the climate of our biomes, everything. So just wanted to touch on that.
Okay, right here up front. Okay, we'll let our runners.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for such a brilliant event. I also really admire the interdisciplinary nature of the panel. I resonate most with the MD on the panel. I'm also kind of in my path to clinical medicine, and I've always found it difficult to bridge the conversation with like nutrition and plant science. It's just not, there's just discord, and never really understood why. We all know that lots of our most basic medicines are derived from plants, for example, so the fact that we've strayed away from that boggles me. But my question to you explicitly is, like, in your practice, what sorts of specialists have you found to be the most receptive to your line of work? Do you generally find that there's difficulty conveying and having these conversations, even though, you know, you've kind of progressed and you have your master's in education and you're well-versed in the true science? So yeah, to be concise, what specialists have been the most receptive to your line of work?
So that's a good question. I want to make sure I understand. The question is that you're asking what other medical specialties are open to what we're doing as functional medicine. I think it's really when patients have success and talk to their doctors, if they're open-minded, I would say that within, there are rheumatologists that are becoming more open. There are gastroenterologists that are becoming more open. There are pockets of these, cardiology. But I would say that it's more if patients come and share their story and they see the difference in them, you know. Sometimes that doesn't work, but sometimes it really does help.
Sure, thank you.
That's helpful at all.
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you.
Any other comments from our medical professionals? Okay. Oh, there we go.
I also have a question for the medical team there. My daughter has Crohn's disease, and we've had a lot of success using food as medicine. But what I'm really interested in is how you measure health. And we've gone back to the doctor. They say it's great, but it's very difficult to measure it. So I'm wondering, how do you in your fields, how are you able to evaluate that? And also, as a note, like I know that this type of farming is preventative. But on the other side, like how much of it to the farmers is curable? You know, and Crohn's disease is rough, you know, and it has ups and downs just like the farms do. And I think sometimes it's not always about being perfect. And how do you tell your patients, when you use food as medicine and you're natural and you go with the flow of the universe, it's not always perfect and your numbers always don't look great, but you're doing it in a way that's gonna have longevity.
So I have probably a different angle on that response. So for a long time when I was in healthcare, we worked on a self-management of chronic conditions program. And so I can't speak to the clinical measures, but what we were always looking at was the physical, emotional, and social health, right? So all of it. And it doesn't really matter to a degree what the clinical numbers might be. It has to do with, are you feeling like your quality of life is satisfactory, and are you able to set and achieve goals and things that are important to you? Because there could be people who are in a lot of pain, physical pain, but they're able to accomplish what's important to them. So that was how we tracked it with our assessment tools, was really through the patient's experience and perspective.
Thanks, Sure, that's a great question. I think, there's stool tests, there's inflammatory markers, but a lot of times I'll go through how many times are you going to the bathroom per day, or how many days of school did you have to miss, and trying to get objective markers that way, and then each time the person comes back, seeing those objective markers improve, and improve and improve until they're just all better. So those are the markers that I would look for, yeah.
So similarly, I would say that people more care when they don't feel well what some of the markers are, because you can do like the stool testing and you can do nutrient deficiency testing to see what might be the underlying problems there. But once a person's feeling a lot better, yes, you can repeat those tests, but a lot of times people are like, I feel better, so then at that point it's a matter of just if someone's very curious. But clinically, if you're seeing a person feel better, you don't always test those, but if you did, you'd probably see the inflammatory markers are down and the nutrient markers are up. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I would look at it.
In our township, we're given these big blue bins so that we can recycle plastics, which are largely burned or buried. But meanwhile, there's like all this food that goes into the trash, and that could conceivably part or all of it could be composted and used as fertilizer, used to build up the land. Is there any research being done on this? Are there any efforts being made to sort of forget about the plastics and let us start recycling something that can actually be used?
There is in Europe. I think that there has been like a you know, an uptick of interest over the, you know, the 20 years that we've had Blooming Glen Farm. Like, you know, we've had that same question, just because you're totally right. If you think about, especially a place like the Northeast, where we are so densely populated that it's a staggering amount of fresh, you know, organic material that gets thrown into the garbage, which actually acts negatively, from what I've read, in a landfill situation. But I think the problem that you run up against are honestly a lot of zoning issues where people don't want that anywhere near their house. And again, when you're starting to deal with, like, you know, a garbage truck that's only going to be full of organic matter trash, like, you'd have to have a very quick turnaround of that getting into a compost situation, you know, combined with the proper carbons. And, you know, we make on-farm compost, and it's the best stuff ever. But I think the processes and the infrastructure and just the zoning and the licensing for it are, at the present moment, the biggest hurdles, because it really and truly is, it's free fertility that's being thrown away. And even, you know, a lot of times compost gets a bad rap because it's bulky. Like, it's not easy to get compost out to your farm or your fields on a grand scale, but there's some really incredible compost tea formulas and people making compost tea that works amazing as a foliar spray, or even something that you could run, you know, in your planter at planting time, that is equally effective and easier to get out there. But I think I'm with you all the way, that is a huge resource that's being tossed. And it's also, we would probably cut our landfill, what we're putting into it, in half if we was just getting out all the food waste. So I'm with you to hope that would happen at some point.
Actually, programs like that do exist. The city of Seattle, which is not a small place, we have 3 bins, one for all the plastic crap, one for true garbage, and one for what is called green waste. And that consists of plant and animal food waste and anything that comes in from a home garden, whatever, you know, dandelions, whatever. And so the city figured out quite a while ago, I mean, it's got to have been at least 20 years ago, that what the issue was, they were running out of landfill space, and they did an analysis and found out how much of the landfill was being utilized by food waste, and said, we've got to get the food out of that waste stream because we're running out of landfill. That drove the idea then to have a true composting program, and they've figured, I'm sure it wasn't easy and there was a lot of stuff to work out, but they figured out, you know, we all have the green bin now, and you put your yard waste in there. Sometimes if someone is throwing food away, you'll get a note on your bin. You put your food in the wrong bin. It goes, you know, your waste food goes in the green bin. So it's possible to do, and municipalities can do that, and it would be up to citizens to say, you know, this is what we want to push for, you know, in our community, or work with other communities, because it breaks my heart to think about you know, all of the nutrients that are getting shoved into a landfill to become a methane source. So it's definitely possible to do. That nut can be cracked, but it takes willpower, and it takes local elected officials, which, you know, oh my God, something, you know, we can do at the local level to save ourselves. I am all for that these days.
Just a quick comment. So one piece of it that maybe is overlooked is then, what do you do with all that compost? So conventional farmers, they don't want it. You know, we spread thousands and thousands of pounds of composted bedding and manure. We spray a liquid compost tea, which we believe is wonderful and incredible for the soil. But for conventional farmers who are used to spreading chemical fertilizers and seeing nearly instantaneous results and super high yields, that's just not something that you're going to get from compost. You know, compost is truly, you know, the results are best seen when you dig your hands down into the soil and see that, you know, truly alive soil as opposed to the dead soil. So there's you need that wide-scale adoption to really utilize all the compost.
Did I see a question? Okay. John?
I don't want to throw a wrench in it, but so I read a book about forever chemicals by the lawyer who took DuPont to court over their, dumping forever chemicals from their factories. Biosolids that are from water treatment plants, a lot of conventional farmers will use that because they think that it's just fertility. Oh, it's great, there's all these nutrients in it. But they're known to have like high levels of forever chemicals in them. And it's one of those things that sort of freaks me out because much of the acreage in the world is conventionally managed, so it's already being fumigated several times a year with all of these herbicides and pesticides and fungicides, which also freak me out. But the forever chemicals freak me out maybe even a little bit more. But a lot of conventional farmers just see it as, oh, this is fertility. We're just improving the soil fertility, and I think it helps out the treatment plants because then someone's going to take the stuff away. So what do we do to get farmers to stop using biosolids? I guess that's my question.
I think it kind of comes back to what Ann said about, if we wanted to have something like a compost situation here, it would have to come from a local level. Citizens want it. I think that a lot of the problems with our food system, the real change is only going to come when there's a consumer demand for a different product. Or at some point, as you guys may attest, we just get so sick that we don't have, there's no other option but to change the way that we eat. Because I think that we live in a time of we want to boil everything down to be super simple, when at the same time, everything is so immensely and beautifully complex. And it's like you said, a farmer's just looking at it as free fertility, this is great. When it's, it's just never that easy. There's obviously going to be some other, ain't nothing in this life for free, as the saying goes. But I think that it's happening. I mean, in the 20 years that we've been running our farm, the interest in organic and sustainable food is again, the only growth sector in agriculture. But I don't think we've gotten to that watershed moment where, there's this huge awakening on the agricultural side, because there's not a customer base that's saying we're not going to buy this food anymore because it's making us, ill. And again, we just haven't had that watershed moment, I think, which, the tide's rising. I'm not trying to be negative about it, but again, it's going to take time.
Well, and I mean, the word is out now on PFAS and these forever chemicals being in biosolids. So there's a lot of municipalities that are saying, okay, well, no more. We can't. We've got to stop that. So I think that's the good news on it. The bad news is there's been a lot of biosolids used in soils, but I'm hopeful there's some microbe out there that is eating up all of the PFAS.
And in short, I guess my question is, how does one translate some of these suggestions and recommendations that you have for farmers to a more industrial level? Because I saw that many of your studies and many of the examples that you used were kind of small family-owned farms. And I know that in many countries, the green revolution has led to this overuse of pesticides and fertilizers and chemicals, but has also led to food stability, like you mentioned. How does one go back from there and encourage more healthful farming practices when, at the same time, you have this huge growth in population and industrialized farming throughout the world?
Yeah, I think you're quite is your question then, do we scale, are regenerative practices scalable?
Yes,
Kind of,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
I think scale's overrated to some degree. These days, it seems that when we try to make things larger and larger and larger, it becomes a Willy Wonka, out of control kind of a system where, or take the Farm Bill, for example. It becomes something so, I love what Tom just said, immensely complex and beautiful or something like that all at the same time. And that, as a thought experiment, is kind of interesting, but it sometimes can become unworkable. I think a way to maybe the situation right now in the Middle East and what COVID showed us is these long, complicated supply chains were actually not that, that allows for scaling, but it also led to vulnerabilities that no one seemed to be really totally aware that they were there until they happened. So I think the way that I think the real question is, how do we get more regenerative practices happening all over as fast as we can, whether you're farming here or in Guatemala or in Indonesia or wherever it might be. And the reason the scale thing may not, just saying everything's got to be regenerative everywhere all the time. The one thing about these practices is they must be tailored to the specific piece of land. Otherwise, you're not getting all of the benefits. And this is why people who want to scale and make everything the same really don't like these practices, because there's a different cover crop mix out in Washington State than there is even on your two farms probably. And people have different equipment, they have different levels of knowledge and skill. So I'm all about, what I think the way to really kind of light a fire on this and get it going is, it's sort of like how, we all began to learn something we didn't know with baby steps. And then we got better and better at that. And sometimes it worked to, hook, take the hand of the person, next to you, and then you're able to do even more. But I just think scale and going really big on this stuff may be over. I don't know that we have to do that. And I'm not saying that if scale falls into place, like take a place like Canada, the Canadian prairies. There is vast acreage up there that is being farmed, and there are some very large regenerative farms, 1,000 acres plus. So I think where it makes sense, then go for it and do it. When you're in other kinds of geographies where you're dealing with highly variable rainfall, topography, other kinds of pressures, you really got to tailor it. And what I like about the tailoring is it makes farmers learn. And most farmers are already pretty smart. And so you give them, I love these guys telling us what life is like as a farmer, because from every farmer I've talked to, it's absolutely true. Every day is a challenge. They do nothing all day except solve problems. And they mostly solve them successfully, because otherwise they wouldn't be here. So I think that is in some ways the true beauty of regenerative, is it makes people smarter, and it makes it, and when you're smarter, things get easier. So that's a long rambling answer I apologize for.
Okay, I see one right here.
Hi, my question is, how do you find an integrative doctor? And can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. How do you find an integrative doctor? And I'll tell you a little personal story. Recently, I went to a cardiologist in Doylestown who had he practiced integrative medicine. And when I went to see him, I said, I've been on a plant-based diet for a month and a half, and my cholesterol and triglycerides and all that had fallen 30 points. And he said, yeah, I saw that. Here, take this Lipitor. So, how do you find a real integrative physician?
Well, you're asking
Yeah,
two of
and
us here.
yeah, and before I leave, I definitely have to have.
But there are, there's an integrative medicine, like directory of doctors, there's the Institute of Functional Medicine has a list of physicians where you can look at the different websites and check them out. So, I mean, there are lists if you want to look them up, and then you can also Google, like, if you Google in this area, you'll find both of us, I'm sure, so.
Yeah, you guys, I didn't see you. I'm sorry.
Well, we're out there.
No,
We
I
have
mean, when I
cards.
Googled, you didn't come up, so.
Well, I mean, this is, we both
Yeah.
are very interested in supporting people, looking at the whole person, and, this kind of lecture is very important because it
Yeah.
educates people on the importance of good food, which is very important in integrative and functional medicine. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I'll just add naturopathic. We're trained in that. What people call functional is what we're trained in our whole 4 years. We didn't have to go back to school for that, like other doctors might have had to after they graduated. You can go to naturopathic.org and put in your zip code. There's only about 20 of us in the whole state. I have another colleague here in Doylestown, and that's it. I actually have another colleague in the room.
Okay.
Oh, there he is. He's 2 rows behind you. But there really aren't a lot of us in Pennsylvania. In Seattle, there's like tons of us. We're, a dime a dozen, but there just aren't a lot of naturopathic doctors out here. But you want to make sure that they're credentialed, that they're registered with the State Board of Medicine. They didn't just do some online health coach program. So.
And go to naturopathic.org.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we probably have time. Oh, I see some for one more question.
Thank you. My question is, I guess, directly for Anne. As a home gardener, not necessarily a farmer, what are some immediate steps I should be taking when it comes to soil health?
So her question was, what can a home gardener be doing, and what are some of the first steps to take? Okay, you guys live in leaf country, right? And there's been an opinion piece on my mind for like 10 years. The problem is I forget about it until October 1st hits, and I'm like, those expletive leaf blowers are out again, and I have not written my op-ed on why we're going to blow those up. Because what you as a home gardener and anyone else who's a home gardener out there is going to do is, and I did this in my own neighborhood. I didn't go into my story, as a gardener and bring soil back to life where we first lived in Seattle, but it involved laying my hands on every scrap of organic matter that was cheap or free that was within a several block radius of where we lived. And one of the primo sources was the neighbors. He calls his place, this is funny, he calls it 7 Oaks. Okay, this is a tiny little lot in Seattle, okay, it's like 3,000 square feet. But somebody had put like 7 oaks on the planting strip. He's on a corner lot, and they're big now, and so I sat there salivating. His leaves, Fred, when are your leaves gonna fall? When are the leaves gonna fall? And there's these kind of oaks where the leaves hang on. But I did eventually lay my hands on all those leaves, and so I had leaves, I had a hoarding problem with the organic matter, and I didn't have enough space to store it all, so I started to mix it up in mulches. So I had leaves, I had coffee grounds, I had wood chips, I had all this stuff, and I would mix it into a nice mulch in my wheelbarrow, and then I would go and lay it on top of the soil, 4 to 6 inches thick, and you think it looks like a lot, but all the fluff goes down. So you're gonna find cheap and free organic matter near you. You're going to collect it and bring it back, and then you're going to make mulch and layer it on your beds. And anybody can do this. There is so much organic matter laying around, and it's not biosolids. So get your hands on it, bring it home, and use it.
All right, great advice. So everyone, thank you to our panelists. You guys were great. Thank you all for coming and supporting the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance and One Health. And thank you for supporting local farms. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you.